Good afternoon and welcome to the March 2015 meeting of the Design Development Review Commission. The commission is made up of volunteers with expertise or interest in historic preservation and design. We generally meet on the second Thursday of the month to review cases. The staff to the commission is Amy Moore and Lucinda Stadler and a variety of other people, and they will each present cases depending on where we are in the agenda. Please feel free to ask them any questions you may have about these proceedings. The meeting generally proceeds with the staff calling the case and describing it. The applicant may also come forward afterward to add to the basic description of the request if necessary. If so, please try to keep your presentation to less than 10 minutes. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. After this period, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond. In most cases, we will make a decision this afternoon after all information has been presented. If your case is denied, or if you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone withstanding will have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in. The sheet is at the back of the room. So anyone who wishes to speak or provide testimony in today's proceedings needs to rise and be sworn in. So if you plan to speak or respond, please stand up to be sworn in. Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings? Yes. All right, thank you. Apparently, we're going to have a lot of people who just sit and watch. Will staff call the roll?
Ms. Great?
Present.
Mr. Gressett?
Present.
Mr. Herger?
Present.
Mr. Powell?
Present.
Ms. Wisnett?
Present.
Mr. Wynn?
Present.
Mr. Marshall?
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Does the order of the agenda still stand?
We've had a few changes since publication. Under the historic portion of the agenda, 2410 Park Street, which is a request for certificate of design approval for new construction in the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District, has been moved to the consent agenda. And 800 Richland Street, which is a request for a certificate of design approval for changes to a historic fence, an individual landmark, has been deferred.
Okay. So, all right. So the consent agenda has been implemented to streamline our proceedings and consists of projects that have been found to fully meet the requirements of the guidelines. Would you please read the list of items on the consent agenda?
Certainly. The first item is 1409 Divine Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the City Center Design Development District. Under the historic part of the agenda, a consent agenda is 3219 Lyles Street, which is a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in Earlwood Protection Area A. Also 1414 Gregg Street, which is a request for a preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill and design approval for exterior changes. This is an individual landmark. Of course, 2410 Park Street, which we just cited as a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District. And those constitute the consent agenda.
All right. Does anyone on the board wish to discuss any of the items on the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I did have a question about one, and I don't want to gum up the works. But on 2410 Park Street, just as we were reviewing the packet of information, I was wondering, the staff had recommended the removal of some transom windows on the sides, I think, was the recommendation. And personally, I didn't find that, I thought it was consistent with the other windows, and if the owner needed to have the transom windows from an interior perspective where I think the windows on the front porch toward the street side have transoms.
That's right.
And then as you go around the corner, you were asking the applicant to remove the transoms. So my question is that going to cause heartache with with the applicant on the interior of the house to have some windows with transoms in the same room without transoms.
I believe it was just a design item, but because the staff member working on the evaluation didn't find that consistent with any other patterns for windows in the historic district, it was encouraged to be dropped. Would you like
But we
to?
are keeping them on the porch side, right, on the street
Right,
side?
because occasionally you do find those on the front of houses. It was
Right.
a higher,
Yeah, I didn't think
Design.
it detracted from the looks at all.
I guess there are two options here. Either we can retain it on the consent agenda, which comes with a list of staff recommendations, or we can pull it off the consent agenda and have a discussion about it. I don't think we can have a discussion about it while retaining it on the consent agenda.
if I can interject one thing, I do believe the applicant was fine with the staff suggestion. So I don't
Well, I guess
believe
if
it.
it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me.
Okay.
All right, so basically, the consent agenda, as it is printed with the staff recommendations that are part of the printed agenda, would be what is out there now. Do we have a motion to accept the consent agenda as it is printed?
So moved.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion on the consent agenda? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the consent agenda as it is printed in the revised agenda is accepted. Thank you for those applicants who made our life relatively simple and straightforward. We now move on to the regular agenda.
The first case on the regular agenda is in an urban design district. This is in the city center design district, 823 Lady Street. This is a request for certificate of design approval for a new construction of a hotel. This was before you in February for site plan approval, and also they gave an informational presentation of their early design drawings. Since then, they have made some changes based partly on some of the staff comments as well as the discussion that was had in February, and made some changes which are in your packet and upon which the evaluation was written. Since then, they have brought some drawings to the meeting today, which we haven't seen yet, but I guess they just wanted to try to address some of the comments. So we'll just, I want to go ahead and click through, I guess, the drawings that were submitted, just so everybody has a chance to see those before they've got another presentation prepared. So this is the parcel which is right in front of the city garage at the corner of Lincoln and Lady Street. This is the Lincoln Street elevation, which is the east. That's one of the main entrances to the hotel. This is the Lady Street elevation. Some of the comments from the last meeting, as well as some of the staff comments, had to do with the wall as one walks down the sidewalk, having a blank wall next to the sidewalk. And then on the west end of this south elevation, you can see the entrance to the restaurant, which is going to be on the ground floor. This is just an enlarged portion of the facade, so you can see some of the detail. They, since the last submittal, they had put some sort of extruded panels around the first couple of floors of windows that you can see here to try to address some of the vertical articulation questions. This is the rear of the hotel that's going to be facing the garage. And then this is the west elevation, again, the restaurant entrance on the right. And this will be what you'll see. There's a pedestrian path. Here's a site plan. What's currently a driveway on the west side of the hotel is going to become some space for an outdoor dining area for the restaurant, as well as a pedestrian path for people to get from the parking garage down to Lady Street. And this is an enlarged plan. There was also some concerns about this being really hot. It's on the west and south side of the hotel, so there was some concerns about trying to incorporate some more shade into that area. And then these are some of the renderings they have submitted since the last presentation.
And these are the renderings that were in our packet.
That's right.
Okay.
And then the applicants have brought an additional presentation of some changes I think they've made since then to try to address some of the staff comments. So Raj Champanary, the developer, as well as Craig Otto, the architect, are here, and I'll just hand it over to them to present what they've got.
All right, thank you.
They're fixing it. If you, okay. The projections of where it was in the mentioned, they were going up first, second, third floor, now going all the way up through the fifth floor. To the roof level, or to the parapet level. So we've got some vertical articulation before we didn't, and we're using two different color bricks. Matter of fact, discussion's sake, presentation's sake, we did bring the two bricks along that we intend to use, which is pretty good, well depicted in the rendering. Stone on the bottom. The major changes from our last meeting with you was the area around the basement level at the restaurant. We've added a larger area of storefront directly under the large area of storefront that was on that first floor where the meeting room is. That'll be down for the restaurant. And then there's a little horizontal piece of glass or storefront right before you enter the restaurant. We've got an aluminum or metal canopy awning, horizontal awning that'll project around both sides of the entrance to the restaurant. We'd like to put those trellises. If you can see, there's trellises on the left side of the dining area, which will actually straddle the walkway, the pedestrian pathway, in order to let plants grow up on there and provide shade.
So the trellis actually is not over the dining area, it's over the walkway beside
It
the
is,
dining area.
and we have another view of that. We have more views for you to, okay. I apologize, I don't know how to use it there. Oh, is that the wrong one? Okay, there you go. That's exactly it. You can see the trellises down there on the left side. They do straddle, go back to that one. They do straddle the walkway. And they'll project shade onto the patio as well from the south and west shining sun. These are just more entrance photos at the corner of Lady and Lincoln. I believe we've addressed most, if not all, of your comments and concerns from our last meeting, and you can see for yourself what we've done, so I'm certainly available to answer any questions that you might have.
So in this presentation, it looks as though the accent brick bands are coming around both the east and the west elevation, as well as they're coming around. In the package elevation, I don't believe you had those accent bands on the west and the east, but you are showing them now.
You're exactly correct. They were not shown on this west side at all. They were shown on the east side, but
Okay.
we've got them on the west, east, and on the south-facing Lady. They do not exist on the back of the building facing the parking
Faces
garage.
the parking garage. That's an alley. Okay. I mean, I think you have largely addressed the issues that I raised. There certainly is substantially more glass on Lady Street, and at the eye level, there appears to be glass. I mean, there was one staff comment about potential, I think, of planters or something in that one section along
Section.
Lady Street.
Yes, you're referring to the outdoor seating area, which is halfway up the building.
Right.
We did take staff's recommendation and discuss that and consider it. In fact, we considered a trellis or a planter there. The owners actually were very concerned about the maintenance issues that brings up because of water being up against the building and roots and other things happening because of plants. So that is one item that they, at this point, have elected to try to get to not do. because of the long-term maintenance issues.
Um,
We did add some horizontal louvers across the top of that outdoor seating area. The area was a little too tall. It was going to let a lot of sunlight in, and proportionally, I didn't feel like the space was correct. So we've added these louvers to bring that sort of ceiling level kind of down a little bit and to provide some sunshade. It does fill in that whole area just a little more than it was previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think even the possibility of some sort of hung planters or elements coming off of that rail might, address just softening up that issue. So it could be something, and it could be a detail with pots or something that came off those two bays that have the rails, or just something that adds a little softness there.
Something green.
Something green, yeah. But largely, I think the large horizontal band between the primary floor and the rooms definitely helps to separate and create a storefront element that is, was not there in the initial concept. I think the addition of the contrasting, I don't know that it's so much the contrasting brick for me as much as it is the fact that you've got a plane change where you're stepping out 8 inches. It addresses the spirit of the guidelines where it talks about articulating it in a way that's, not quite as horizontal as it was before, and trying to match up. Obviously, it's very difficult in the context of Lady Street where there's a mixed context of massing. I went back and looked, you do have some bigger buildings and some smaller buildings, some 1 stories and 3 stories. And so, but I do think I do think that by going with the vertical articulation, you're bringing it closer in the context of the neighborhood in terms of being less of a large horizontal mass.
I do, and I agree with that. I kind of avoided it, honestly, to begin with, because we were sort of going for a horizontal look. And I wasn't sure that vertical elements was going to work for this building.
And it did.
But yeah, I agree. And the more we worked with it, the more we liked it. In fact, Lucinda's suggestion from the 2-story tall projection to the 4-story, the upper 4 stories, I didn't like the idea until we put it on paper, and then we thought, this looks pretty darn good. So thank you for the suggestion. But we're pleased with it, and I do think it does help fit into the environment a little better there.
So, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you've been addressing the comments and have worked at it. Commission questions, comments?
So one of the big views of it.
I do have actually two elements I'd like to just ask you about. The rear entrance, is there just one, or is there 2 rear entrance from the parking area?
There's only one public entrance from the parking garage. Essentially right across the driveway from the entrance to the parking garage, you can enter into the back of the building, and the only way to get in is with a card, a key card.
And is that recessed or with a canopy?
It's recessed within, under a roof. So as soon as you step off the sidewalk and walk up a few steps into where that entrance is, you're under a roof.
Okay.
And so when you use your key or whatever, you'll be under a roof. Now, if you haven't checked in yet, you don't have a key, you'll actually have to walk around to the Lincoln Street entrance and walk in. We're trying to keep some security attached to that back entrance. The other entrance that's farther down the hill is an employee entrance only or service entrance.
Okay. Also, from the last presentation a month ago, there was certainly some interest in the how you would address the parking area or entryway and the service area in the rear.
In the rear.
And I see from the packet here that the rendering shows that it's entry from Lincoln Street only and exit. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
With the enclosure at the far end for garbage and services? and so on.
Exactly, yes, sir. Which is
So-
convenient to where the restaurant would be located. That's their back service door, is right
Okay.
out that door.
Well, that's very well done. And then the last thing that was a concern last time and continues to be is the roof element of utilities. Have
We
you?
understand that all air conditioning equipment will have to be screened. We will have air conditioning equipment on the roof.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we will. And there is a parapet wall around the building that's only 3 or 4 feet tall. So up close, it would screen any HVAC equipment, but from a distance, it's not tall enough to. So we'll have to provide some additional screening on the roof for 2 fairly large HVAC units that will be on the roof.
What material are you planning to use for that screening?
Well, you've caught me, and I haven't really, honestly, I haven't put enough thought into what that material would be. I don't have an answer for you. I apologize. I just know that we're going to have to provide some screening there. We'll obviously follow the guidelines of whatever DDRC's guidelines are. Generally speaking, we would have a metal material of some kind that'd be the lightest and easiest thing to install. Just have to make sure that it meets city's guidelines. Is that, if you're able to give us some,
I mean, yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, something like the aluminum panels you're using on the whole corner element, floating as a screen would be an ideal match with the rest of the building.
I think we can do that. Those would probably be composite panels, but we could probably match that with uninsulated regular metal panels on the roof with concealed fasteners and no ribs, very little vertical or horizontal lines in them.
I think that would be consistent with what's shown.
Okay, all right, excellent.
That would be great.
I think everybody's concerned. We've had a few recent projects where from a distance you're actually seeing the tops of the mechanical units, and I think we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. Is everybody,
right.
why that's a concern for everyone right now.
I understand. From assembly or main, I think that you would probably be able to see the roof of this building since it's downhill. You wouldn't probably see it from the UG Street end.
No, but you've got probably a 30-foot elevation change from assembly coming downhill, so.
Right. So, yes, sir, we will definitely screen the HVAC units, yes, sir.
Awesome.
Yeah, we
Commend you
probably
on a very
wouldn't screen them
good.
from the parking garage side.
Yeah, I don't, sir. Yeah, I'm not sure how important it is.
Right. I'm not sure there's any real view of the back of the building from anywhere with the parking garage is bigger, a big element in the way from that side of the city, so not sure you'd see it anyway.
I think that as long as you're not seeing them from, if you were coming down Washington Street looking across Lincoln, there's an open vista that way. As long as you're not seeing them from a public right-of-way,
Correct.
then I think you've got them screened from our guideline standpoint. I don't think our guidelines would require that if you were standing on the 4th floor of the parking garage, that you not be able to see them. But if you're on Washington Street, which is the next street over, coming downhill, which has the same downhill slope, and there's no tall building, blocking your view from that way, I think you would want to not look up and see them. So you get some screening from the corner tower element of the garage, but if there's something that's visible from the public right-of-way, then I think they need to be screened from that.
All right, well, I can assure you I'll go and drive around there and make sure that we cover all the angles.
Talk a little bit about the composite material that's, I think it's only on one place, which is off to the right of the entrance on Lincoln Street. What exactly is that material?
It's sort of a cement board kind of product. In fact, what we're depicting there is actually a brand name called Nichiha. You may be familiar with it. It's a competitor to Hardy, James Hardy. And it has the appearance of wood grain and the color of wood grain. It's sort of one of a loft's little signature things that they do on a lot of their buildings. So it's a horizontal panel that's 2 feet tall by 6 feet long, stacked but set 1/3 like brick joints at 1/3, and that's the material proposed. Go back to the Lincoln Street, please, elevation. There you go, right there. Behind that SUV. No,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where
leave it.
I just wanted to know what it was labeled as cementitious panel. I didn't know exactly so it's a pre-finished Nichiha product that's designed to sort of resemble a stained wood. It's got a wood graining as part of the pre-finishing.
yes.
Okay. And that's really the only place it is, right, on the,
Are you doing that?
No,
it's the only
I'm
place
trying
on the
to figure
building,
out
right? I
why
mean,
it-
it's just that accent panel to the right of the door is the only place.
That's the only location. Well, we have some around the back facing the indoor courtyard.
Okay.
You won't see it unless you're in the courtyard. You would, or up on the upper decks of the parking garage looking down.
Let me try and put it back there, sorry.
That's
It
okay.
just keeps going.
But yeah, that Lincoln Street elevation by the entrance and then around into the back of the building are the only two locations where we've got it indicated.
Okay. Other commission comments, questions?
If I may, there was some concern about the slipping grade on Lincoln and how to address the wall there as it gets taller and taller.
On Lady Street?
I'm sorry, on Lady Street. The staff's recommendation is a planter there. Have you given any consideration to what might work in that area to break up the hard surface? Right there on the bottom right of that image.
The bottom right of this view.
Of that slide, the triangular sliver there where you can see that person kind of walking down the sidewalk. Right now, it's what?
I want to make sure I know exactly what you're talking about. Are you referring to under the outdoor seating area?
Correct, yes, right there.
It's a stone veneer, 2 feet by 1 foot by 2 foot stones. Right now, it's stone. We don't have the planters there now. We explored that possibility. The owners were opposed to it because of worried about maintenance of having water always soaking the side of the building and roots growing in. Dale suggested perhaps some hanging boxed planters from either the railing or maybe the floor level right below the railing, which I think is a good idea because those could be installed such that there's a little bit of separation there. When you water them, it wouldn't create a whole lot of problem. But
Is there something other than a vegetation that the owners would approve?
I'm not sure. We haven't explored other possibilities there. We were trying to, I guess from my perspective as the architect, I was thinking that overall, I felt like that the building had enough articulation, enough interest in different areas, the tower on the corner, the storefront, the outdoor seating area, that small area would not perhaps stand out as something that looks blank. And I also believe that occasionally buildings need some blank space or negative space to sort of offset some of the positive space and the things that are going on. So I felt like overall it wasn't necessary to have something dramatic or significant there. The commission can tell us.
The reason I bring it up is
I believe having a little bit of more glass, we put a little glass over there, and it's
We just felt like we were
It makes a
emphasizing
purpose,
that
yeah.
entrance near the restaurant at the basement with some additional storefront and the canopies that we didn't feel like we needed to come quite all the way up the hill with something. Didn't know what else to do there, to be honest with you.
the
Is
recommendations.
this on a continuous loop, or are you pushing?
I'm trying to figure it out.
I keep asking him to stop, and he's not doing it out there.
I'm getting dizzy.
I am trying to get it to stop.
Leave it there and see if it just stays.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm just getting a little,
Yeah.
we got a giant monitor right here between me and you.
Staff's recommendation in that area is to actually add something. And so if we simply vote on this based on what the staff has recommended, it's going to give the bias to opposite of what you just described. And so I'm giving you the opportunity to say, well, what would be your intent there? If staff's recommendation is either planters or a mural, what would you as the architect of record recommend in that place if this board says, we agree we should have something there, but your owner is saying we prefer not to have vegetation?
Well, the planter, the only discussion we had about the planter was a permanently built-in planter, which would be at the base level at the sidewalk.
Understood.
I personally like Dale's idea of having some planters that would be more or less not permanently affixed to the building, but would be attached to the side of the building, either at the railing level, although I would prefer not to have them at the railing level because when you're sitting there,
Right.
you would be able to see outside as well. So I'd like to see them, if they were hanging off the side of the building at the floor level and had some stuff growing out of them, then the people in the outdoor seating area can look down and see them, and the people walking by are looking at them. So that would be a good compromise, in my opinion, and something that we would like to.
So, I mean, if in our final recommendation, we were to simply modify that to say that you would work with staff to develop some sort of edge treatment under the outdoor seating area along the Lady Street side of the building, then we could leave it for you and staff to coordinate and come to some consensus of what would work not a built-in, maybe built-in, but not ground level, a wall-mounted or some other detail where it was planters that could be on brackets or on.
Exactly. And I like the idea, and I think that some green right there would be very helpful.
The only concern we had with the planters is that even after hanging them, when it's time to water them and season them, over the years, you would start seeing stains on the wall, and that is more of a high maintenance and probably making the building look, not as it's supposed to be.
Something that was done in pots with drip irrigation, though, where it was a controlled amount of water that basically retained it in the pots, probably could mitigate that. I mean, I do think this all does come back to the sense of the guideline of providing something at street level so that as you walk, they're not, the intent of the guideline is to avoid large blank walls at eye level, so that there's a sense of activity at a pedestrian scale. The buildings, basically, as the guidelines are written, there are two ways the building is reviewed. One is from the pedestrian scale of walking by it, and the other is sort of the massing in relation to the whole neighborhood. And I think I think that there's multiple ways you could address it. I would certainly be comfortable with leaving it to you and staff to work out exactly which way, but simply coming up with something in that two-bay area that provided a little more scale and detail at the pedestrian level.
And I think we can, yeah, we'll come up with something creative.
And while I think a planter would be one way, there also could be some sort of wall-mounted sculptural element as well, or something that, textural element that provided something at eye level. So it may not have to just be a planter. It could be something totally, non-living that would do it as well. But I think we can leave that I would certainly be comfortable leaving that to you and staff to work through.
If I may ask one more question about the staff recommendations. The addition of lighting on the pedestrian walkway between Lady Street and the garage, the recommendation is that you match the Lady Street lighting. However, with the trellis there, that may not be appropriate anymore. Is there a recommendation from you on what kind of lighting would be appropriate in that space now that you have a trellis installed?
Well, that's an excellent question. I know that the owners were in touch with SCE&G to talk to them about providing lighting on that side of the building that would match what's at Lady Street. That could probably still be done beyond the patio. In the little curved walkway area, there could be at least one street lamp
SCNG
there.
has many different types of designs, and we can definitely find something that'll,
Right. I think that with the trellis there, we'd probably have to do something that would be something that you would own, the owners would own,
Right.
rather than rent, so they have to be at the level of we have some piers or posts around the outdoor seating area. There's some privacy screening around there, just railing. We'd probably have to put them on top of the posts.
And
You could also work lighting into the trellis element itself, so there was some downlighting, mounted inside the back faces of the trellis that would bring some light down on the
Right,
sidewalk.
some sconces up above or
Yeah.
something, yes. So you're welcome to add that to your list of things we need to work with
I'm
staff.
simply looking for the options, because if you follow this guideline, it's going to lock you into what matches Lady Street, and I think more flexibility in that case would be appropriate because of the trellis.
Thank you.
All right. Are there? Well, no, but we'll ask in a second. Are there any other commissioners' comments or questions? All right. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to come forward and speak about this project? If you would, you need to come forward. If you were not, let's do this all at once. We only swore in one person. Anyone who would like to speak, please stand and raise your hand and affirm to tell the truth. Do you affirm to tell the truth in this hearing? Yes. All right. Now, we can all come forward one at a time and be sure that you're signed in, or acknowledge who you are as you come forward, so that we can get you on recording so we know who's spoken. We'll put the sign-in sheet up here on the podium for you to sign in as well. We just need a record of who speaks at the hearing. All right.
Hi. My name is Steve Henson. I'm a Vista resident. And a matter of fact, we just formed a Vista Neighborhood Association, so we'd have maybe a little input. And I have no idea how the process works. I like to plead ignorance, and it sounds like we're at the wrong place in this process. Perhaps. It looks like everything's kind of been approved. We're kind of talking about, the look of the brick and the, plants and all. But I guess my concern, and if y'all will kind of indulge me again, I'm probably not exactly the right spot in this process. You know, you mentioned a while ago the mass in relation to the neighborhood. You know, my concern is that this building is too big. We used to have and I know this may not be the right spot to talk about it, but this is not just for this building, but going forward. We used to have a limit when the Hampton Inn was built of about 50 feet, I think. And then they built the Hyatt Place, and we were involved in that a little bit, thinking it was too tall. And now it's been built, I really think it looks much worse than I thought it would in relation to the Dupree building, which is kind of the signature building in the Vista. So now this building is going to be, at least on one end, 70 feet tall with no setbacks. And I'm just concerned, is that the standard we're going to have going forward? That kind of height and mass? Compared to the kind of traditional buildings in the Vista, it just seems way too big to me. And again, this building may be done, but I mean, I think if we have a Vista full of buildings the scale of the Hyatt Place and the Aloft, I think that's going to be a problem. So anyway, that's my input. Now again, I don't know, you might give us some feedback on where we need to, who we need to talk to, maybe the Planning Commission or City Council.
I believe, and someone on staff probably can confirm or correct, I believe that this project is part of a particular zoning district related to the parking garage
It's a
that had
PUD, yeah.
set height requirement on it. I also believe that they got approval for a 3-foot addition on that height from the Planning Commission last month, which is not something that we review. We basically review compatibility massing, you know, in relation to the city center design district guidelines. We can review it in regard to those issues. In past determinations, I think we have been led to understand that we don't have the authority to even though we have some mass review and form review, we don't have the authority to ask a developer to go under a zoning allowed height. I think we've been told that per our review, the zoning allowed height is something we can't turn down. We can only deal with the articulation and the form within that. So that's my understanding of where our purview comes. And probably if you probably the Planning Commission last month would have been the appropriate place to challenge the 3 additional feet. The Planning Commission probably almost 8 years ago would have been the place to challenge the overall height, because I think it was approved as part of the parking garage development at that
Right.
point.
Well, I guess just to talk for just another minute. We've been to some meetings. They had one at Adventure a while back, which was nice, and they had one down by the Blue Marlin where people talked about height and scale of Vista and all. We'll keep having these meetings, but as a resident, you know, and I think there's supposed to be some master plan at some point. But my fear is with the development around us, by the time they get around to having a master plan, this can all be built out. But maybe the Planning Commission would be, I'm really here to ask, you know, where the best point to get involved in. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Bart Walrath, and I am also a resident of the Vista. And kind of a follow-on to Steve, I noticed you talked a little bit about views and different perspectives. And I also want to know how to get involved in the process, because this will, in fact, block the view of the State House from where I live in the Vista. And so and I didn't know anything else to get involved sooner. So kind of disappointed.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I mean, I think the same comments that you know, in terms of what where our authority lies is in compliance with the guidelines, but our general interpretation is we can't restrict what's allowed by the underlying zoning ordinance. At least that's what we've basically been told in previous projects, is that the overall function or height is more a function of the underlying zoning ordinance, and then we can review it in terms of how that massing within that framework of the ordinance relates to the neighborhood per the guidelines.
And the Planning Commission is where to get what the zoning ordinance.
Planning Commission is ultimately, the Planning Commission is a recommending body. City Council has complete authority on changing or modifying the underlying zoning ordinance. So that's something that's totally up to City Council. We are a quasi judiciary body applying simply the guidelines for the various neighborhoods, but we don't have the authority to change the underlying zoning ordinance. You need to come back to the mic just because the proceedings are recording. That's
Real quickly, will this go before the city council or not?
It will not. We are, again, charged under the state enabling legislation as a quasi-judicial group reviewing the application per the guidelines. The guidelines are approved by city council, but once the guidelines are approved, we interpret and apply the guidelines in a quasi-judicial manner, and appeals of our decisions actually go to circuit court. So if you wanted to appeal our decision, if you had standing, that appeal would be at the court level. It's not a political process at this point.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. John?
Just to answer a couple of those questions for those who were in the audience, just so everyone's aware, I know a lot of people think that when you live downtown, all the zoning's the same, but particularly in the Vista, we have M1, which is a industrial classification. We have this parcel that's a PUD. We have C districts. So they all come with different heights and requirements for the base zoning. So if something's next to you, it could be different than what your zoning is. If it's 3 or 4 blocks away, it could be the same as what yours is. So you really have to consult the zoning map in order to, and then look at the table to know what the heights are in different areas. And that's probably more for the questions that the applicants had, and we'd be glad to sit down with them and explain that to them, what those standards are. And in terms of, blocking the view of the Capitol, there are some cities that have height requirements protecting certain views. We don't have that. Our terrain slopes down towards the river, so anyone who's closer to the river, like you mentioned, Mr. Marshall, you're going to be about 30 feet lower, so that starts to make the terrain really does affect that. And even if someone who builds a 1-story or 2-story building, they could be blocking someone's view just because of the way the grades are. So that's just part of our landscape here in the city. And then in terms of that plan that was discussed, we are working on that. There will be some things coming forward. They're probably going to be spring, summer, that kind of time frame. Mostly looking at the guidelines and some recommendations for zoning changes, but no specific zoning changes at this time. So there'd be some recommendations to deal with some of those questions.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak regarding this project? Any commission questions or comments following up with the architect developer? Would someone like to craft a motion, perhaps addressing the two things that we talked about during the discussion?
Give it a shot. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval for the certificate of design for 823 Lady Street based on the revised presentation that the applicant made, which incorporated many of the staff's recommendations, to include going forward with the screen material and extent of the material to be reviewed at staff level to hide the rooftop mechanical equipment, and also to resolve a solution for some type of planters that would be acceptable to staff and to the applicant.
Along Lady Street?
Along Lady Street, yeah.
Or do you want to planters or some other solution that would deal with the pedestrian scale per the guidelines along Lady Street so that it would give the flexibility for it to?
Sure, we can include that. Planter elements or other sculptural type elements that may help with the scale treatment.
Okay, and then I think also the lighting was one other issue along the plant.
The lighting,
So it didn't have to necessarily match the Lady Street.
the lighting does not have to match Lady Street, but be appropriate to the trellis design.
Okay. All right, so we've got a recommendation with 3 clarifications to the staff recommendations.
Second?
And we've got a second. Is there any discussion of the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you. All right. All right, we've got one more item left on, the agenda today, which is Lawrence Street. So is Jerry going to come forward and present that?
The next item is 907 Lawrence Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes in the University Hill Architectural Conservation District. And Jerry Threed is the staff member whose project this is.
As Amy said, this is a request for a certificate of design approval for an already constructed screen porch addition on the right rear of 907 Lawrence Street. The applicant began constructing this addition earlier this year without obtaining design review or obtaining the proper building and zoning permits. They were issued a letter by a zoning inspector requesting that all work be stopped and permits could be secured. Typically, staff recommends for additions to have a slight inset to differentiate the new from the old, but in this particular instance, there's a very little room in the backyard due to the presence of a swimming pool. Right now, it's constructed of wood and is mostly open with the exception of a plywood panel with board and batten details, and staff has recommended that the board and battens be removed and that a stucco panel be installed in this location to be more consistent with the stucco detailing found on the upper portion of the house. Now, today, the applicant contacted staff to ask for the option to use woven screen instead of the stucco panel, and by doing that, they would be more consistent with the rest of the addition. Staff supports this request as it will increase the openness and transparency of the addition. So for a staff recommendation, staff finds that the proposed screen porch addition generally complies with Section 7, additions, and Section 6, new construction, and recommends granting a certificate of design approval for the project at 907 Lawrence Street with the following conditions. Staff recommends that the board and battens be removed and that a stucco panel or woven screen be installed in this location, with all details deferred to staff. Are there any questions for staff?
I mean, the large solid mass predates this project entirely, the two-story tower element with one randomly placed window there?
On the backside?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And Ron Finney is the contractor. He is here today. I'm not sure he has been sworn in, but if you need to talk with him, I think that he could probably give you some information about the project.
They've agreed to take this one solid wall that's facing the street off and basically screen that along with all the other.
Right. If you look at your top right, you can see the portion of the screen porch addition that has the plywood with the board and battens. If you look at it from the visibility from the street, you can see it circled in red right there.
Has staff reviewed with the applicant how they're going to screen the porch and come up with acceptable details that are acceptable to the guidelines?
Really what we had talked about is just screening in between the posts. If you can look, it does have consistently placed posts with the header detail at the roof. So really it would just be...
when we say screening in between posts, do we mean running screen over the face of the post and putting batten strips, or do we mean actually applying some other 2x2 element or something that's inset into the post and the screening so that there are panels of screen inset into each
Right.
post?
My interpretation is that there would be some kind of detailed trim on the inside of the post where the screen would be stretched.
So the post would be articulated an inch or so beyond the face of the screen.
Right. It's not just going to be, I guess, stapled and wrapped with screen around it.
And the applicant is comfortable with that. And under those conditions, I personally think if the applicant follows those conditions, if the panel that's shown as a solid wood panel is simply created as a screen panel, then it will be a very lightweight screen structure with a minimum roof profile that seems to largely not be visible from the street and would be compliant with the intent of the guidelines, in my opinion. Are there any commissioners that have any other comments or questions on it? I don't want to prolong it unnecessarily. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak regarding this project? Someone want to make a recommendation?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I recommend that we issue a certificate of design approval for exterior changes for 907 Lawrence Street with the following staff recommendations regarding the screen porch addition: that the board and battens be removed and that a stucco panel or woven screen be installed in the location to be consistent with the stucco detailing found on the upper portion of the house, with all other details deferred to staff.
Second.
Okay. That gave the option for screen. A second? Then was a second down there, or? Okay, second. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. That, I believe, is the last regular item on the agenda. Under other business, we have two items. First, a discussion of proposed demolition delay ordinance.
Yes. That was something that was brought to staff's attention by members of the Arts and Historic Preservation Committee, which is composed of some members of council. So we had discussed this some time ago, and the idea being that there are many buildings in the city which are not protected whatsoever, which might be real resources for the city, and that some sort of demolition delay might be an adequate response to those buildings without protection. So the way most of these work, ordinances work, there's some already in South Carolina and across the country, is that within a given area, which would be approved by council, there would be a time delay, if you will, before someone could pull a permit and have it approved for demolition. So those vary. The most effective ones are actually longer. Some people have a year delay on contributing resources that have been proposed for demolition. Some people do 6 months. Some people do 3. But what we are proposing at this point in time is to administer this over City Center, which does not have demolition review, but which has many resources, especially mid-century resources, which are not terribly popular at this point in time, but which we expect to grow in popularity and understanding, as well as some older resources. So we're currently suggesting a 6-month review for those buildings which are contributing, which would be a small portion actually of City Center, but a couple hundred buildings, but still ones that we think would merit looking at in terms of both their architecture and perhaps cultural history, because there are buildings out there we don't understand what their cultural background is, and we need time to research that before we allow a demolition. A good example being buildings involved in the civil rights movement that may not look like they have a lot of architectural significance, but may have had some important and significant activity going on in them. So anyway, just wanted to let y'all know that this will be going forward. We're going to be taking it to Planning Commission in April, and then we'll see what their response is in terms of a recommendation, and then it would be going forward to council after that. So,
Quick question. It's my understanding that these would be specifically designated, however many number of buildings,
not designated, no.
or delineated, or?
Right. What we're doing basically is saying we already have an area with an overlay, which is the design district or city center, which goes from the river to Pickens, from Elmwood down to, I think, Blossom, maybe a little below Blossom. So we already have this area with an overlay, and it is where much of the significant building went on in the city. It's the core of the city. So our older buildings are there, as well as some significant mid-century architecture. So it would probably have an additional overlay on top of that, if you will, to just sort of say this is an area, anything in this area is something that we're going to look at. We already have a survey in part, so we sort of know which buildings are significant. So, but we still need just a few days to check. Staff would have about I think it was 3 or 4 days to look at historical significance of a building and then determine whether it would come to y'all. These would actually come to y'all for demolition review if they were deemed significant buildings.
That would have to happen within the 6-month interval, or how?
Yeah, typically what would happen is we would review it, we would make a determination whether it's significant or not. We would place it on the next agenda for y'all to have a look at. Y'all would deem it, you'd look at our research, we'd use all the same demolition criteria for y'all to look at to see if you thought it had significance, and then it would go through a 6-month delay, basically, if you thought it had significance, for us to try to find some other avenues for the building other than demolition.
So in reality, we would only be buying 6 months if we as a commission refused to determine that it met the criteria not to be demolished, then it would trigger a 6-month period from that determination.
And it
after
would
that-
then come back in 6 months if necessary.
Now, after 6 months, the developer would be able to tear it down regardless of what we had determined? Or?
No, it would come back to y'all to review what was found. If there are plans in place where the building could be saved, if we needed to have real information in terms of its structural stability, that would give it time for those reports to be made. If there are other people who may be interested in buying the building instead of it just being demolished, it gives people a chance to figure out tax credits or a possibility, the Bailey bill, all those things.
What would happen if at the end of that, we determined again that in our evaluation of the guidelines, it was not a suitable candidate for demolition? Would at that point create an actual demolition prevention for the building? Okay.
Should council accept the proposal as it moves forward?
Okay. So it's a substantial strengthening of the existing ordinance where we really only have demolition review on a very limited number of designated landmarks and specific, it's a substantial expansion of the existing demolition review. Okay.
It's in response to some community concerns about buildings just disappearing.
No, as a personal level, I think it's a great idea. I'm just trying to clarify what exactly it would be from a guideline standpoint. All right.
We'll keep you posted.
All right, so that covers that item on the other business. The next item under other business is elections. Hypothetically, this may be my last meeting. I guess we are waiting to see if City Council appoints people to replace the two of us whose terms are up.
Right.
And, I'm sure they will. Whether that happens this month or next month may determine whether this is our last meeting or not. Yeah, there are three positions because Ms. Hildebrand, who passed away, so there are 3 open positions. And in order to, typically as I understand it, what's happened in the past is as soon as council makes that appointment, then we would step down. If council failed to make that appointment before the next meeting, the people who are currently on would try to continue to serve so that we would have a better shot at a quorum.
If you can.
If we can, So we're waiting to see. But it still would probably be appropriate to move forward in my mind with elections, and I would be more than content if I am here next month to just serve as a member, and if I'm not here, I'm gone. It would go either way.
It actually might be helpful for an incoming chair to have a familiar board to sort of get used to running the meeting with.
So I spent most of my time sitting somewhere off to the right on this, and I'm perfectly fine to go back for one meeting and do that again. So I think it's appropriate to go forward with elections. I would assume that the process would be that the 2 of us who are not going to be here in the future would probably not vote, or do we vote? What is the process in that regard?
I think we've always allowed outgoing members to vote. We
Okay.
think you're knowledgeable about your fellow board members. And yeah, I know y'all will do nominations, but we also have ballots here for you guys, just little strips of paper in case y'all are more comfortable writing names down. It's entirely up to y'all if you'd rather do a hand vote or.
Lassane Ashby has a, I'm sorry, I'm terribly.
I was going to make a motion if it's
Okay.
appropriate.
All
Mr. Chairman, I would like to nominate Mr. Wynn, Robert Wynn, my colleague to my right, to be the next chairman of the DDRC.
All right.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? I think that's an excellent choice. Since we only have one nomination, does anyone wish to nominate anyone else? If not, I think we could simply have a vote by acclamation on the one person that's been nominated. All those in favor of Mr. Nguyen being chairman, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So I think we solved that very quickly.
I noticed you did not ask Mr. Nguyen if he accepted that.
He
You're
stayed
right.
quiet, so we took that, we took that as a,
I oppose.
He did not.
No,
vote.
I accept, I
order of
thank you
business, too.
all very much.
Ashley has another.
If you don't mind. I think it would be appropriate if, in the record, we would thank Mr. Marshall and Ms. Wisnett for
Yes.
their service on the DDRC. I think you've both been here, what, 8 years?
6 years, I believe.
Six, okay, 6 years.
It just seems like
That's, it just seems like it. So if you don't mind in the record, give our thanks to them if there's appropriate follow-up needed
Yeah,
with a written document or whatever. But
Yeah.
thank you for your service.
Thank you.
very much. We've appreciated y'all's diligence, attendance, contributions, so, and we will miss you.
It's been
All
a
right.
great staff to work with,
Thank you.
I must say.
Yes, it's been fun.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Marshall. Andrea reminded me that we still have some continuing ed. We have folks who need to catch up on their continuing ed, so there are sessions in June and October, but those are the only ones left. So I don't know I don't know who needs to catch up, but if you contact Andrea and just let her know if you're gonna, which sessions you can attend, that would be great. And that's all I have.
All right. In that case, the only other item on the agenda is approval of minutes for January, and it should be February, shouldn't it?
Mr. Chair, I would like to suggest that we're not finished with nominations.
Oh, do we need a,
We need a
Vice Chair?
vice chair.
forgot that we had a vice chair. I'm sorry, you're right. Do we have nominations for vice chairman? Is there someone who has thought about that?
I'd like to nominate, if I may, Mr. Gressett for vice chairman.
I'll second that.
Have a nomination and a second. Do you accept that? Sure. Okay, so we have a nomination and a second. Is there any discussion of the nomination? All those in favor of Mr. Gressett being vice chairman, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Does that cover that? All right, then I think we do have February minutes.
Yes.
That's what it is. I was reading the wrong line on the item. So all those, if anyone reviewed or any comments on the February minutes?
I move that they be approved as distributed.
Second?
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And then motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. We're adjourned. I'm sorry, I looked over. A mind slip for 2 seconds.
This slide out of your binder, it was right
I think it was there.
I'm not sure what it was. There's only one copy. It might
I think it's just loose paper that slid out of here. I think that was probably something that was stuck in. Well, I don't, no, because that's what this is too. No, I'm sorry, that is, this was,
does it
that
go
was
with
this,
something I grabbed?
that was this month.
What is this?
Why did we call